Now it's my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Kavin Senapathy. Kavin is an author, public speaker, and science activist writing about health, medicine, genomics, agriculture, and food. She is the co-executive director of the international pro-science, pro-biotech movement March Against Myths, and co-author of The Fear Babe, Shattering Vani Hari's Glass House. Kavin will be speaking to us today about her approach to science communication. Let's welcome her to the stage.
So I'm excited to be speaking with all of you today. Thanks to everyone for being so welcoming and showing me around and really feeding my desire to geek out about food science. I learn from people like you every day, so I really appreciate that. So I'm here to talk to you about science communication and why it's a marathon, not a sprint. So what does that mean? Why is it a marathon and not a sprint? Essentially, it's a long-term conversation. Science communication isn't a one and done, look, here's the science, it's correct, and therefore this conversation is over. We would all love if that were the case, but it simply isn't. So what I'll share with you today is my experience communicating science, not only through blogging and writing, but also through just having conversations with family and friends, and of course via social media. And a lot of that has come as a surprise to me and really continues to surprise me. So it's a learning process for sure. Citation Imitation. Try saying that a few times fast. I practiced a couple times there. And I know I'm talking to a group called Citation Needed. And we all know that when we're trying to sway someone from a non-evidence-based position, citation is king. You need facts and evidence to back up and convey a point. So when scientists and science enthusiasts hear a questionable claim, what do we say? We say, citation needed. So it works really well in theory, but what about in real life, dealing with regular people? And I mean, this is an example involving me, and it happened just last week. Not even kidding. I was ready to get into bed. It was pretty late, very tired, and I was all set to fall asleep, and I noticed a spider on the ceiling above the bed. And it wasn't an innocent-looking spider that wasn't moving. It was moving around and ready to come get me, right? So I did what any sensible, rational person would do, and I got some Kleenex, pulled my hair back, and got ready to get the spider. And I failed miserably. I couldn't find the spider. So instead, what I did is I got out of bed. I couldn't go to sleep. And I posted on social media about this story. And a lot of people told me the correct, absolutely good advice, including just burn your house down or just strip all your sheets, do some laundry, and don't sleep tonight. Or move to another room, move to the couch. And then a few well-meaning commenters, examples that I have up here, of course they're well-meaning science enthusiasts who follow my page, so we all know that they love science, they love evidence. So one helpful person said, it's a spider, not a werewolf. It probably doesn't even bite humans. Very few of them do. Where's your logic, Kavin? I'm disappointed. And another commenter, for a science defender and slayer of woo, you should know spiders are mostly harmless, and they'll leave you alone and go munch on some flies. And of course, any reasonable person knows that a spider on their ceiling isn't going to hurt them, but I certainly wasn't going to go to sleep. And then my favorite comment is the third one. You don't understand. It's even worse than Kavin has described. As everybody knows, then you see the little star for the citation, if you fail to successfully kill a spider, there's a fairly decent chance it will transform into a super spider and come back to murder you in your sleep. And the citation, of course, was Citation Imitation. So, I mean, this is a kind of funny tongue-in-cheek example, although it's true, but this really applies to how we communicate with people. We need to value their fear as much as we don't like it. One thing I've learned that we have to accept before we can sway people about matters of science is that science denial is a form of fundamentalism. So you have religious fundamentalism, political fundamentalism, cults, etc. These are all forms of fundamentalism. And so while the vast majority of the public is in the middle ground regarding issues of science, the kind of leaders of the science deniers, oftentimes those with financial interests, are fundamentalists. And these people have real influence on policy and public perception when it comes to vaccination, biotechnology, genomics, health. And we must accept that this fundamentalist vocal minority is very influential to the middle ground, probably the largest group of people. People like us are well versed in the scientific method. Of course, I'm not a scientist, but I understand basically how it works. And unfortunately, most of the public, most of the middle ground doesn't. And so they're kind of ripe for exploitation by these fundamentalists. So with any form of fundamentalism, including science denial fundamentalism, beliefs and feelings trump facts. People think, I believe this, and this makes me feel a certain way, and therefore, number one, it should be important, and it may very well be true, which isn't necessarily the case. Fundamentalism also always has sacred symbols, and you see that in science denial fundamentalism as well. One of the big ones is nature, and I say that with a capital N, nature. Nature is sacred. And with fundamentalism, we must, the fundamentalists must pit a them versus an us. So there's evil to fight, and there's threats to our rights. And these threats come in the form of corporations or capitalism, the unnatural, and even some people, the way they perceive scientists sitting sinister in their labs, in their lab coats, doing who knows what, I don't know. And then there are always fundamentalist leaders as well. So a lot of you know the food babe, obviously. And we have the Joseph Mercolas, the Saralinis, and the Vandana Shivas. And these leaders must be adored blindly for them to continue to influence that middle ground. And these leaders are very good at subverting their positions of power. Most of them are in positions of power, whether financially or politically or otherwise, but they will act as if they are being trampled upon by whatever forces. This isn't a food science example, but a recent example is scientist Andrew Wakefield, who is known to have published a fraudulent study linking autism with vaccines. He recently had his documentary called Vax dropped from the Tribeca Film Festival, and he cried censorship and lack of due process. And so again, this is a man who's in a position of power, but he subverts his power. So March Against Myths, which John briefly mentioned, is an organization I co-founded just last year with scientist Dr. Carl Haravan Mogul and also the third director, David Sutherland. And we were formed in direct response to an international activist group known as March Against Monsanto, which some of you may be familiar with, but I don't believe that they're actually marching against Monsanto. Monsanto is kind of this symbol of everything these people hate about food science, the food system, agriculture, and what they call big ag, and have since ballooned to also anti-vaccine, other science denial stances, and even conspiracy theories like chemtrails. So March Against Monsanto has an annual event worldwide where they actually rally and march against Monsanto. So we decided last year that we were going to counter-protest. So we formed March Against Myths. And we had a great turnout last year, our first year, and this is happening again this May. Now, I'm not suggesting that any or all of you join March Against Myths and carry signs in the streets against March Against Monsanto, but not that we wouldn't welcome you in May. If you would like to, I can give you more information. But the reason that I bring up March Against Myths is that a lot of what transpired in the streets around these events worldwide can really apply to our everyday communication, whether it's having conversations with people, speaking with reporters, blogging, writing, social media, etc. And I should add that the reason that we decided that we needed science activism or direct action campaigns is that there's so much on the science denial side that we felt it was time that we needed activism not only in the pursuit of truth and convincing people of the truth, but because so many of these are social justice issues and humanitarian issues. So here is one of my favorite scenes from March Against Myths, or Mammoths for short, in Chicago. And you see our signs there, they're very fact-based against, again, these are kind of centered around GMOs that year. That was our focus, but we plan to change that a little bit every year. So we have signs like GMO save the Hawaiian papaya, or farmers have never been sued for cross-pollination. And we make sure to keep our messaging very tactful and fact-based. In contrast, you see March Against Monsanto. And in Chicago, they were stationed across the street from March Against Myths. And if you can read some of those signs, you see expletives, middle fingers, signs like evil seed of corporate greed. And the vitriol that we encountered with March Against Monsanto was appalling and shocking to me. But these people sort of represent, again, the extreme leadership of the science denial fundamentalists, how they convey their message and get it literally out onto the street, but also into public perception. Before that first Mammoths event, some scientists and science communicators didn't quite believe it would be worthwhile, but afterwards, a lot of them have come around. And I should mention that with March Against Myths, we never expected to or even really tried to sway the participants at March Against Monsanto, right? It's almost impossible. It's very difficult to sway people who are already so far gone in their beliefs. But what we thought would be important and we found to be largely true is that we could reach the middle ground by having this dialogue and this counter-presence. Another one of my favorite signs from March Against Myths before we move on to the next section is this guy. He wasn't in Chicago, but he was at a different March Against Myths location, and he made this neat costume, and fear is a lock around his neck, and science is the key that unlocks fear. So evidence can mean freedom from fear, and we need to remember that even if people don't seem afraid on the surface, fear is what's driving their beliefs in non-evidence-based messaging. So how do we overcome science denial fundamentalism? It's something, again, that I'm still learning, but I'll share with you some do's and don'ts. The first one is don't throw science, which is always very tempting. So what does don't throw science mean? This can apply everywhere with, from chatting with a friend over coffee, a friend or a family member, to dealing with, say, your aunt's well-meaning forwarded messages, to talking to perhaps a misinformed or uninformed reporter or journalist, or of course something that a lot of us maybe are guilty of, staying up all night arguing on the internet, right? So we can't say, look, this is science, therefore you're wrong, accept it. Again, that would be ideal. We want it to work that way. But you're dealing with not necessarily rational thoughts. You're dealing with feelings. So it doesn't work that way. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and so it's something that takes several conversations, days, weeks, months, years. One big do is to respond to doubt or someone who is misinformed with questions. One of my favorite phrases is, "Did you know?" You want to really challenge deeply held beliefs with questions and gently take people out of what's often a false comfort zone. I was talking about this with a couple of you earlier today, that people want to feel good and sometimes cling to false marketing messages, such as local or non-GMO or organic. And they're in this comfort zone. They believe that these things are healthier or better for the environment or better for the farmer. So another question I really like to ask is, well, why do you believe that? Where did you hear that? And so then it becomes a civil volley, and it's often easier said than done to be civil, but most people aren't marching against Monsanto. Those people are just regular people who have regular fears and desires. And again, don't expect to finish the discussion in one social media thread or one chat or one article that you're writing. Expect to come back to it. People don't like to feel like they've been wrong. They don't like to feel like they've lost. Another do is do appeal to emotion. And now there can be very exploitative ways of appealing to emotion. So you have to be strategic when appealing to emotion and try to not cross that line to where it's exploitative. So this image is of a group of women, including me and some scientists and farmers who have since become known by the hashtag Moms for GMOs. So the Moms for GMOs last year wrote a letter to a group of celebrity moms, including Gwyneth Paltrow and Sarah Michelle Gellar, who came out in opposition to GMOs in their food. And they participated in what was called the Conceal or Reveal campaign, which was sponsored by an organization called Just Label It, which is an organic industry-funded group. And so we appealed to their emotions as moms, but obviously we didn't expect to get a response from them, and we still haven't, although that would be great. But in this way, we also appealed to the emotions of parents and moms and grandparents and families everywhere who just want to feed their families safe and healthy food. And another don't is, don't be hard on honest ignorance. Most people are honest in their ignorance. They simply buy, sometimes literally buy, the misinformation they've been sold. And so a passage from the Moms for GMOs letter, which it's published on the internet, so you can read it if you're interested, is, "We know your statements come from love and concern for your children, because ours do too. We feel that it's our responsibility to clarify misconceptions about genetically engineered or genetically modified organisms. We want to provide insight into why we feed our families food containing ingredients derived from GMOs and explain why we oppose mandatory GMO labeling." So, as you can see, or if you know me, you might know that this is truly how I feel. So this is where I believe that not crossing the line of being exploitative with appealing to emotion comes in. I feel like some organizations or some emotion-based rhetoric can be disingenuous. Another do is do save criticism for the bigwigs and the leaders of the science denialist fundamentalists. These are the people who deserve our harsh criticism. The bigwigs are the sellers of the myths. Here you see John Rulak, who is the owner of Nutiva and founder and chairman of GMO Inside, an anti-GMO organization which is very influential. And here in this article, I've called him a big organic businessman and master manipulator. So the Rulaks, the Vandana Shivas, the Mercolas, Mark Hymans, the Dr. Oz, I could keep going with this list, but I believe that they are disingenuous for the most part, and to some degree ignorant, and that they're intentionally misleading for financial gain or notoriety. And so this is where people with a science background should focus their criticism. Another example of saving criticism for the bigwigs is, as Vanessa mentioned, the food babe, whose name is Bonnie Hari. I believe most of you will know who she is, but she is a food activist who is well known for the phrase that there's no acceptable level of chemical to ingest ever. And she's known for mobilizing her followers to what I call bully companies into dropping certain ingredients. One well-known example is Subway and the dough conditioner azodicarbonamide. And so what happens when people like the food babe apply this sort of pressure, and this isn't just her, she's an example, is that not only do companies end up getting rid of sometimes often beneficial ingredients or additives, but even worse, at least in my opinion, even worse, is that the general public becomes convinced that there was something wrong with it in the first place. And so then they believe that companies didn't have their best interest at heart. So this perpetuates this sort of distrust and this culture of not trusting companies and food scientists and scientists and so on and so forth. And so why spend a 400-page book on Bonnie Hari, the food babe? The book isn't really about her. My co-authors and I used Bonnie Hari, the food babe, as a sort of symbolic framework to not only debunk or refute a lot of the most popular food myths of our time, but also to examine why they continue to proliferate despite the mountains of evidence against them. Another don't is don't forget about fence-sitters. These are also the people that I referred to earlier as the middle ground. So here you see again a scene from March Against Monsanto, which was across the street from us. So if you look at this picture, one of the March Against myths people took the picture from across the street. And you see such lovely messaging as the end is near, and again, the GMO, OMG, WTF. The OMG has another sign in front of it, so you can't see that. But what's important here are the people in the cars and in that pickup truck. They were really very clearly curious, and there was a traffic stop right there, so they had, cars were often stopped there and listening to speeches being given and what was going on. And these cars and this pickup truck really represent that middle ground, those fence-sitters that are often silent. So for example, if you're having a discussion on social media, say on Facebook, for every one very vocal person opposing the science or questioning the evidence, there are a few who are quietly looking on. You'll probably never hear from them, although I hear from them every now and then in private messages and such. Sometimes people just aren't that vocal publicly. So it's important not to forget about them, not only on social media, but when you're having a conversation or even when you're talking to a family member. There's often someone else there if it's at a party or something. And each of these individual conversations really have a ripple effect. They count. So whether you're speaking with journalists or even sending out a tweet on Twitter, if you're a scientist and people can relate to you and you're putting out information straight from the source, that's very valuable. So this is a little image that one of my page followers made for me after he heard me use the term misinformation hydra. So when we're communicating, again, in any fora, our short-term goal is often to debunk a person's claims, be it Vani Hari or Mercola or Seralini, or to deconstruct chemophobia or alternative medicine or anti-vaccine or anti-GMO sentiment. But whenever we're writing or speaking, we have to also think about the long-term goal. I think of these people or this beast as the misinformation hydra. So you can debunk someone like Vani Hari, who has recently become, she's still somewhat influential, but at least the mainstream media doesn't take her seriously. But you can break down chemophobia or a Vani Hari. It's like cutting the head off of a hydra. Another one will grow back in its place. So what we need is to really help arm people, especially that middle ground, with misinformation radar, to be able to apply their critical thinking skills to claims that they see on the internet, which I call the Wild West of the internet, because there's so much bad information out there. And so that's kind of our long-term goal, even if when you're writing a blog or something, or making a video, sometimes you have to repeat the same sort of messaging framed differently, because you never know how or when it will strike a chord. Another do is point out hypocrisy. This is sort of an extension of saving criticism for the bigwigs, because I tend to save that for the bigwigs. So here's a headline for an article I wrote. Hundreds of people have beef with Chipotle. Ditch the hypocrisy or ditch red meat. So as many of you might know, Chipotle recently announced that it was going, quote, GMO free. And I say quote because they use ingredients still derived from genetically engineered products or plants. But I looked at their website shortly after this announcement, and one of the main reasons they cited for going GMO free was that the herbicide glyphosate applied to plants engineered to resist them was categorized by the IARC as carcinogenic. And the journalist Ed Yong has since then categorized the IARC as confusogenic, because their carcinogen categories make very little sense to the lay public, let alone some even more well-informed people. And so subsequently, when the IARC categorized red meat as a carcinogen, a probable carcinogen, it would follow logically that they should then drop red meat. Of course, that didn't happen. Of course, their customers wouldn't like that very much, but I believe it's a valid point. So you have others like this. There are people like Vani Hari, Mercola, and Hyman who will demonize certain chemicals or additives or ingredients, and then sell them in the very supplements and foods that they hawk on their website. So that's another example of hypocrisy. Or musician Neil Young, who came out with an anti-GMO album, who also happens to have type 1 diabetes, which the insulin that he would take for the diabetes is derived from a genetically engineered microbe. And another do, write or speak for your audience. You might, in a given week, speak to a total layperson, a journalist or a reporter who may not know anything about the science, or someone who is somewhat savvy. And the reason that I show watermelons here, I mentioned this to Kelly earlier, is that I was giving an interview to a reporter who was writing an article for a very popular women's magazine. And the article was supposed to be about food labeling. And she asked me to explain how seedless watermelons are made. And some of you probably know how this works. So I started explaining, and this is a lesson that I learned from this conversation. I started explaining the concepts of ploidy and that one parent of the watermelon is treated with the chemical, which doubles the number of sets of chromosomes in that parent. And I started to continue, and she stopped me. She said, wait, can you please simplify that? I don't think my readers are going to get it. And I said, okay. And I thought for a moment. And I thought, okay, I'll leave out the ploidy part, the chromosome part. And I said, well, one parent is treated with a chemical which makes its offspring unable to produce seeds. She said, no, I get that, but you see, I don't think my readers will understand that watermelons have parents. So this was an eye-opening moment for me, that sometimes you really have to start with the basics before you go up notch by notch in terms of knowledge and explanations. And the final don't, you'll have to forgive me for this picture. It's tongue-in-cheek in a series of blogs that I write when I'm frustrated with something. And there's I often use a picture of me looking discouraged. So the final don't is don't get discouraged. So remember, you can't sway a person necessarily in one conversation most of the time. And even if you haven't, or you don't see that you've made progress with a person or a group of people, you can't see the inner workings of their mind. They'll probably go home and think about it. And always stay open for that person to come back to you. Make them feel like you're a safe, non-judgmental person to talk to. And also know when to end a conversation before it gets too heated and too contentious, which again is easier said than done. So speaking of ending conversations, I'll leave you with a trailer to the upcoming Science Moms documentary. The documentarians were inspired by the Moms for GMOs letter that I mentioned earlier, and so this is a trailer for that.
Genetic engineering does not involve syringes with needles. It's just not how it works.
If you put into Google, what is a GMO? The first few Google results are bullshit. They're not science-based, they're not reputable sources, they're going to be websites that are sponsored by the organic industry to scare you about your food.
I can't imagine parents reaching for something that's untested, unregulated, and literally has no active ingredients in it. It just baffles me.
If someone is talking about a synthetic chemical and calling it a toxin, you know they don't know what they're talking about, and then you shouldn't listen to them anymore.
Nature will kill you really quickly.
There's some organizations that are trying to scare people away from buying certain fruits and vegetables. That's crazy to me.
The voices of moms who inform their decisions with fear and hype rather than evidence, those voices are so loud.
I don't understand this mindset that anyone who doesn't have the exact same worldview as you must be paid to have that worldview.
Conspiracy theories, accusations. I've been called a fake mom. I have gotten death threats.
Being a parent is scary. We're all trying to do the best for our kids. There are plants all over the world. They're going to be wiped out. And so there are real world consequences.
We could really change things for the better using this technology.
Science is so cool.
Thanks. So again, that movie is still in production and should be out late this year. So here is all my contact information. I love to talk to people on social media, so get a hold of me that way, and we can open it up to questions.